just the way that arts develop the mind, as well. And certainly in marching activity develops the body as well, and strength and all those things. It touches on so many different things, I think, that are important for success. Like drum corps taught me, I knew how, but I wasn't always successful, but it taught me how to get out of bed in the morning and go to work, because you had no choice.
Right.
I think that's a big, I remember being a college student before I marched too, and just coming to grips with, being an adult, at that point, or being accountable, responsible for yourself. And I think that was a huge shot in the arm for me, just in terms of you have this kind of bred into you, I think, through that experience of, what am I going to accomplish today? Right? Is this done? Is, just like getting hooked on that sense of accomplishment and working towards a goal. So I think that is, that can be taught at any level. I think it's not specific to drum corps, but I think that's a big thing that the arts, and specifically like the marching arts, I think really reinforce pretty successfully.
Greetings, I'm Mark Riley, and welcome to the Washington Tattoo Podcast, where the world's musical traditions come to life. The Washington Tattoo is an international music and arts festival coming to the Washington, D.C. metro area. Our podcast explores the lives and stories of world-renowned musicians, dancers, producers, choreographers, artists, educators, arts advocates, and those who serve our cultural communities at large. For more information and donations, find us at www.thewashingtontattoo.com. Now, please enjoy this episode of the Washington Tattoo Podcast, sharing the power of the arts, one story at a time. All right, greetings, everybody. We have Tom Rarick here, who's the percussion arranger and composer for the incredible Bluecoats Drum and Bugle Corps from Canton, Ohio. He's a member of the prestigious U.S. Air Force Band here in Washington, D.C. He's also an Innovative Percussion Signature Series artist, Evans Drumheads artist, as well as a highly sought-after instructor, clinician, adjudicator, and consultant. So, Tom, thanks so much for taking the time to chat today.
My pleasure to be here, Mark. Thanks so much.
So I'm really big into kind of the reasons why people do what they do. And I know usually it's for most musicians, there's somebody or something that starts kind of that spark of that first inspiration. So who would you say would be your first inspiration and why?
I guess it's kind of an easy one for me, because it was my father, who's a rudimental snare drummer. He marched senior corps in Pittsburgh area, central Pennsylvania area. I grew up he stopped marching around the time I was born, to raise a family and that kind of thing, as people do sometimes. But so from an early age, I was taken to drum corps shows. He was always playing, extremely curious, even after he had stopped marching, and a huge fan of the activity, rudimental drumming in general. I guess that he got into kind of the alumni corps, after I was in middle school, that kind of thing. And I started going down to rehearsals with him, and then the next level of inspiration was kind of seeing the guys that either taught or marched with him involved in that. And they kind of took me under their wing. And that was how I kind of got my start. It was never pressed upon me, you're going to do this, but it was always something that was around, and just, wanting to do things with your dad and having to share that. And him being so willing was just a really special thing. So that's a really easy question for me to answer. Being my dad as being my first inspiration, for sure. Yeah.
That's awesome. I mean, you hear so many challenges of, people who have kids and they try to, make their kids either play baseball or make them play drums or make them, do something else. And they're like, nah, I'm going to go skydiving, or I'm going to go do this.
Yeah, I think I was at a parade when I was in middle school. I saw some of my friends go by in the drum line. I was like, that looks kind of cool. Dad, could you teach? He's like, yeah, if you want me to, I will. I'll teach you for sure. So next thing I know, it's, Haskell Har, and we're in the mirror with, down, up, down, the whole thing. It was great. So
that's awesome. So was drum corps activities when you were growing up? I mean, what were some of the bigger shows in the area where you were growing up?
Well, I grew up in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. There was a show there at the high school that I remember going to religiously. I think it was kind of a senior and junior show. Hershey, Pennsylvania was a huge show. I think I made my dad drive me to Ohio at one point because it was the closest the Blue Devils were going to get, like in the late '80s, because I was all into that at that time, And DCI East, of course, too, just the Allentown scene. Those are, I guess, the big shows like regionally that I went to pretty much all the time. So, but yeah, it was just a family activity. That was what we did. Instead of, well, we did other stuff too, but people go to baseball games, music parks. We went to drum corps shows, and it was that was our entertainment, and loved it. So
that's awesome.
Yeah.
I mean, you've been a part of a whole slew of great musical programs throughout your career. Can you speak on a little bit of why you think it's important that, younger folks or kids or students join musical activity or a drum corps? Why do you feel like that would be an important thing to do these days?
Well, I can just speak for me, for sure. I mean, I see that in the students we have now, but, especially at the Bluecoats. I mean, they're kids from all over the world, predominantly United States, but international students, just so highly motivated and kind of the cream of the crop in terms of like go-getters and that kind of thing. But I think even at like the high school band level, educationally, I mean, it's that I think what it teaches you to be a member of a team, accountability to the people around you, I think just the way that arts develop the mind, as well, and certainly in marching activity develops the body as well, and strength and all those things. It touches on so many different things, I think, that are important for success. Like drum corps taught me, I knew how, but I wasn't always successful, but it taught me how to get out of bed in the morning and go to work, because you had no choice. Right. I think that's a big, I mean, I remember being a college student before I marched too, and just coming to grips with, being an adult, at that point, or being accountable, responsible for yourself. And I think that was a huge shot in the arm for me, just in terms of you have this kind of bred into you, I think, through that experience of, what am I going to accomplish today? Right? Is this done? Is, just like getting hooked on that sense of accomplishment and working towards a goal. So I think that is, that can be taught at any level. I think it's not specific to drum corps, but I think that's a big thing that the arts, and specifically like the marching arts, I think really reinforce pretty successfully. So
right, yeah. I mean, and then taking it to that level of top 12 DCI, and you start saying, all right, here are expectations, meet expectations or don't meet expectations, and you're going to find an outcome, and that's some real life lessons right there for some young folks.
Sure. And kind of realizing that, sure, you want to do well to competitive activity and all that, but the real value is in the work. It's like if you don't love the 9 a.m. to 5 p.m., the rehearsal, the detail and all that kind of thing, you're going to have a really bad summer, like in terms of like, you're not into that kind of work and kind of thing. That's the real reward, is that accomplishment as a group, I think.
Yeah.
Usually that spawns, pretty good results if you're dedicated to that as a group too. So,
Yeah, I love that. And I think the transfer value to that's incredible too. I mean, you're going to get your paperwork done. Hopefully you're going to get other things done. Hopefully you're going to learn, the step process of how it, what it means to get a project done in steps. Yeah. Great.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I am a huge fan of your arranging. I love the shows that you've put together over the years. And honestly, in my opinion, I feel like you've found like a really great balance of, classical music structures, but like there's a lot of flow between segments when you write. And honestly, like there's always some slick transitional nuance that I always seem to like fall in love with. So, one of the questions I'd love to ask is just, how, when you're starting to think of an arrangement or think of composition, what are some steps when you begin that process?
Well, thank you. First of all, compliments. That's great. I guess, getting started for me is, I guess it starts with a team. Obviously, we have, several people that work on the design team, specifically in the music kind of thing. And I think we all have kind of an equal kind of input into things. So I think that's Doug Thrower does the brass arrangements. Matt Jordan does electronics and coordination, and has his hands in all different types of things with us. But I think that it starts from a macro standpoint with being, I think everybody feeling free to throw ideas and to contribute that way, like on a conceptual level. I think for me, when I get like a chart that I'm ready to start working on, I definitely start like with some sort of like a flow chart or a sheet. Actually, I have some. I was working on for another project, but just like
Nice.
Primary, voices, battery, front ensemble, visual considerations, that kind of stuff. That keeps me organized. And I think when you talk about like transitions and that kind of thing, that's something, I guess, kind of how my mind works. I think I played a lot of drum set. I think, I know I did, but played a lot of drum set growing up. And I think that informs my writing, I think, from a flow and a kind of how you hear proportion in a phrase, or like how to set up certain things, the choices you make, I think, in terms of what you hit when and how you play it and how hard and how frequently. I think that those instincts that you develop, I think, just by knowing what an 8-bar phrase feels like, what symmetry, what asymmetry does to a phrase in terms of like number of bars or counts, that kind of thing. Those things that you reinforce, I think, through listening, through your own experiences musically. I think they, certainly for me, they leak into like when I just hear a phrase and like what I would hear that goes along with it, and kind of provides a macro kind of feeling for that. And then the rest is kind of detail. It's deciding what instruments go where, right? And then thinking visually about how, if I have the snares play this phrase with the mellophones over here, like, okay, what's the next thing? How many, they can't be somewhere else on the field playing with another group, or just trying to, I guess, solve some of those issues, or not issues necessarily, but solve some of those kind of flow questions, I guess, before it ever gets to a point where it's being like put on the field. I think that helps. So in terms of like transitions, that kind of thing, I think sometimes in the marching arts, in show design, that kind of thing, if things are like, this is a trap that I fall into, or, is trying to make things too seamless, like where it feels right, it feels proportional, and feels, say you're listening to a Pat Metheny record or something, it just floats, it moves so effortlessly from one thing to the other. I think in terms of crowd reaction, the things we go after from allowing an audience member to take in a phrase, react to it, hopefully clap, and then move on to the next thing, and then have them be able to sample those things easily without stifling your own applause, or that kind of thing. That's something we constantly have to kind of work against, or at least our design team does. We tend to, our first pass usually makes things pretty seamless. Then we have to figure out like where those points are. We need to like, artificially kind of create that space, I guess. So but I'm happy that you noticed the transitional things, because that's something that it's important to us. Like, this is how we get from one place to another, and sometimes we spend too much time doing that. But
no, I love that too, because I remember the first time it was really brought to my attention about how important writing and transitions are for a piece of music to feel a way that it's expected to feel, and there's this idea in content and a macro and micro approach to how a phrase should feel. And when you're talking about the voicing process and everything else, I know like there's a lot of work that goes into all of that, and it's, tons of hours, lots of meetings and everything else. But it's, again, I think like that's really what makes some of the best arrangers out there the best arrangers, is that attention to detail for a nuanced transition. And, hopefully, it's funny you say, hopefully it comes across the way you intend. But I mean, you make so many mistakes that you start to figure out where those traps are. And I'm glad you kind of brought that up, because, that's, I think, part of that learning process as an arranger, is learning what are your traps as a writer, and making sure you learn those lessons from there.
Yeah, and just the more, it's not that you can't do those things you feel strongly about, or like your tendencies go to, but just so that when you look at a phrase or you hear it, that kind of thing, you understand, like we're doing this for this purpose. And then making really purposeful choices rather than that's just the way it sounded to me and that's what came out. You can analyze both sides of it, your artistic side and also the commercial side. It needs to translate into be digestible by an audience,
right,
or a judge or whatever.
Well, and I think that's a really important thing too. Like I've heard, this comment a couple different times. I think it's always funny. It's the idea of, hopefully while you're educating the audience, they're also entertained. It's like, no, it's
yeah.
So, I mean, and I think that's always one of the things I have loved about your writing is that I think it does both. I think there's definitely a lot of educational content for it, and it is super entertaining. So I just say congratulations to, figuring that out. And I'm just glad that you're able to share that with the kids now because, I'm sure the kids that come and work underneath your staff, they're taking those lessons home with them when they're done with the season.
I think so. Yeah. I mean, I think they're attracted to a style. I think over the past several years, or for me, it's almost been 2 decades of learning, I think, to get to this point. But just with the Bluecoats, but they come there for a certain style, I think, of writing or show, or all the things that get put together in terms of what they're asked to do as a performer. But but I think they take that out there and they build on that in their own like I marched in the cadets back in the 90s, and I still love that style, and I was drawn to that, and that's what I wanted to do, and I took that and built built my influences or other things on top of it, and I think hopefully they're doing the same thing with their experience, I guess.
Yeah, I love it. I mean, someone gave that experience to you, starting with your father, and then you're giving that experience to them, and they're going to give to somebody else. I think that's what the beauty of the whole arts are. You have that tradition of handing it down to the next person.
Yeah, and on Instagram or whatever, these kids are, especially at this time in our collective of experience with being pretty much virtual. I see every day these kids. I mean, from our core, from others, there's so much content and creativity, and just I'm inspired and learn from them, and seeing that stuff, and it's really neat to see that come back. So
that's awesome. So one of the things I feel like you kind of touched on it a little bit is like the Bluecoats percussion section over the last, I don't know, say 10, 12, 15 years has really, I think, explored the concept of groove in a totally unique way. I know Roger Carter's brought his flavor to it, and there's been like this idea of just really exploring space and the feel of space in between the notes. And so once the performers start to get the music memorized and they get it in their hands, so what's kind of the next step in the teaching process once the show starts to kind of go off the page and kind of onto the field?
Yeah, that's kind of one of my favorite parts of the process, is when they stop learning and start performing, I guess. And
right.
And there's a transition in there between what I've written or what other people have given them, and then it becomes something else. Like there's a transition to what they add to what is black and white on a page, and in a hotel room somewhere that we've dreamed up, and then it becomes a real living and breathing thing. So as far as like the teaching process, I think it's more about I think just it's obviously reps and information and that kind of thing, but it's also it's working on their minds and what they're thinking about when they're playing. In my role, as I see it, I mean, there's a lot of like everyday texts, and people do great educational stuff on the micro, right? Tenors and cross and here, and your little eighth of an inch this way, and it's all that stuff. It just is awesome and needed and that kind of thing. But I think when I come in specifically, I love to be able to give them a context of, okay, now this part here's what you should be feeling. Here's how your emotion might change. Tenors, okay, you're double the mellophones right here. This thing crossfades, then you become the focus. So you need to like when you get to count 8 of this phrase, you need to feel like a soloist, right? That's just
right.
It's more about feeling and I think emotion, how they process what they're playing, through as a performer and how that role changes. So I think any insight that I could give them to that, hopefully, is my most important role after the music's been written and the edits have been done, or 'cause there's always those kind of procedural things that happen. But I think beyond that is giving them purpose, perspective, and kind of that 30,000 foot view of how they fit into the picture, because it can get very, very micro. Obviously, that's part of the activity. So.
And I think that's awesome too, because I think one of the biggest things for me is trying to explore how your part of the conversation fits within the rest of the story that's being told. And, you have your part of the writing. Obviously, you have a guideline of, what you're supposed to say and at least a little bit of detail of how you're supposed to say it. But until you start putting those pieces together, you're not really understanding, when I finish this word, that hands it off to the mellophones, or that hands it off to the front ensemble, or I think that's really cool.
Or even anything, like in last year's show, we started with a pretty literal, it was a Beatles show. We started with a pretty literal representation of Ringo's solo from the end, which is ba-dum, 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 ba-dum. These 2-note groupings kind of thing that he kind of explored throughout that. And it's not really for anybody, really. It was a motivating thing for me that throughout the show, we kind of used that as a theme. Whenever we needed to, it was just on the palette of things to use. And this is just an example, but being able to point those things out in the arrangement that connect them from, a minute, 30 seconds into the show to what happens midway through, to how that morphs. And, I think anything that deepens their meaning or deepens the meaning of what they're playing, rather than just, 9/3, 16th notes, or whatever. I think that helps them, develop as a thinking musician, all right, and just understands their purpose. And I think that's kind of the goal with that. So you mentioned the groove stuff before too, and a lot of people ask about the drum set use that Roger uses, like in a lot, and the kind of thing. And I think that's just something that's it fits it came out of necessity, honestly, because they outlawed the amplified metronome, like at championships, and Roger's like putting sticks together. He's like, what am I doing? Like here, like I just play a drum set instead. So, but there is I think I guess points back to kind of what happens next after they learn the notes. But I think there's things, again, with drum set, you can emphasize the half note in a groove. There's kicks in there, there's nuance, I think, that he can dictate non-verbally, I think, as he plays along. It's not all the time, I think, but it's for when you're just building that sense of style. I think that it's helpful there's a conversation happening, I think, between him or whoever's playing and the group, and a listening back and forth that, again, deepens those kind of musical instincts and understandings. So
I love that. I mean, the whole concept of, there's definitely obviously science behind it, technique behind it, but at some point there's this artistic human element, and trying to explore that, within a handful of months over the summer is a challenge, obviously. And so you're trying to find kind of any edge to really kind of ramp that up. And I really dug the idea of that, putting the drum set out there for a lot of reasons. I mean, but I think from an intellectual and artistic standpoint, I love that you brought up, emphasizing a half note versus emphasizing a quarter note. Or is this whole section really eighth note driven, or are you allowing kind of more expression to happen within those larger note groupings?
Exactly. Yep. Just understanding the big beats in the music, I think, and how in the high, the low, those things you hear in a drum set part, or even just, again, nonverbal, just the way a left hand moves to the snare drum, like that to me says something about how I should feel this music. If I see somebody dictating it to me with this relaxed kind of molar idea, or that kind of thing, there's all kinds of nuance in there, I guess, that's fun to uncover and explore, even if we don't realize it in the moment, I guess.
Yeah.
So, and then you have the guys on YouTube that are like, oh, I can't hear the drum line. Wish the drum set wouldn't be there. Like, so, but it's fine.
It's music.
Yeah, it's all good.
It's music, and it's honestly, that's what I think that the coolest thing about the drum corps activity today is that it's emphasizing all sorts of genres of music. So I'm a huge fan. I applaud you guys for really putting that out there, and it's unapologetic, which I love. I think it's great.
Yeah, you don't get a lot of points for subtlety sometimes, so you have to.
Right. All right. So things are interesting these days. At some point, we're definitely going to go back to some type of relative normal, and people they're going to school, they're getting their music degrees. Do you have any recommendations for some folks that are looking at different careers in music?
Well, yeah, I'm sure I do. I guess my career has been pretty. It all happened pretty quick myself, I guess. Went to undergrad and then pretty quickly got my Air Force Band job after that. But I guess what I would say is that I guess the broader your experience can be, I guess there's a lot of people that tend to specialize. I think, whether it's I want to be a concert marimbist, or I want to be or a solo marimbist, or like those kinds of things, which are amazing, I think. But I think just there reaches a point where I'm sure that they understand this too, but you have to be marketable, right? And like things that actually pay bills, and things that provide for a family and that kind of thing. So I think the more you can do, and the more you can mix that with what you're passionate about, I think would be to your credit, I guess, as a career. That's not to say that if you're extremely passionate, if you know what you want to do and going after it, that's a way to go too. Just I think there's probably sacrifices and things along the way. So just be reasonable, I guess, about that, and think about career is the artistic side. It's also a business side, I think, of things. Yeah. So, and have a plan for both, I guess, and how you're going to reconcile those two together.
Yeah, that's a great way. It's like a mathematical equation. You have your reconciling from the business and your own, artistic desires, sure. Right?
Yeah.
So greatest musical moment. Do you have one?
I read that question. It's a really hard one because there's things that pop up, I think, for sure. Was fortunate to perform at 2 Super Bowls with the Air Force Band, and that's a pretty major highlight, I guess. Certainly wasn't the most difficult thing I've ever played in my life, or the flashiest thing. Another moment that always pops up in my head is a senior recital. I got to perform Downfall of Paris with my father in my senior recital.
Wow.
That was just a memorable moment, kind of I don't know, not the end of, but kind of like an arc had completed at that point, where kind of thing. So that was really memorable. As an instructor or designer, like there was a time where there was a group that I was working with here in Maryland. Tom Hannum was in to work with the group, and he heard an arrangement that I did, and just it was very subtle, very off to the side. It was kind of like, hey, you should do this. Like I don't know, somebody like that gave me like some validation or encouragement that way. That always sticks in my head as a moment there. I was like, oh, okay, that's a possibility. Like I'm just trying all this stuff, but
right.
So I guess those are a few, I guess, if anything.
Yeah, I love that too. 'Cause I can honestly say some of my favorite musical memories were not the ones I was throwing down a zillion notes. It's like the idea of wow, that was just a great, simple musical. The crowd was there. It was the feeling. And, that's that balance between, are you really just enjoying the moment, or are you trying to, be so technical about it, which is, it's hard. That's hard in all of our professions, but, yeah, I really like that you brought up something that was it was, the Super Bowl is huge, but you're going around and you're not probably going to play the most difficult stuff. And that's how the things are for us too. It's like you play out to the White House, you're not playing the most difficult thing in the world, but it's pretty cool to sit there and play those beats there.
You guys are going to stand there for 45 minutes at attention and then just play a cold 7-stroke roll perfectly, though. So that's always our favorite part of that.
Yeah, it's great when you by accident are kind of positioned where you're like half standing on a mound for a tree, and then your other foot's in the grass, so you're sitting for 5 minutes and your back is at a 20-degree angle or something crazy like that. All right, so with obviously you have had to adapt. You've had multiple seasons in your career. What's something that keeps your batteries charged, or how do you stay inspired these days?
I mean, it's really, I think for me, it's the people that you surround yourself with, I think, are like that I've, especially these past couple of years with the drum corps, that keeps me fresh and really just, it's a good, everybody's in a certain place in their careers where they're not trying to prove anything to each other. It's just, we all love each other like brothers and sisters, and it's very genuine, I guess. So, and I think, it's taken a while to get there. Worked with some wonderful people before that too, but, chemistry is, is what it is with that. So I think that's one thing that, just keeps me, I want to be there with those people to create and with some of my best friends in the world, so that's just a great, thing to have all in the same place. So, I mean, that keeps me going. It's my colleagues at work with the Air Force Band too, just like, and with the great things that they do and things that I'm exposed to that they do that I'm not, or that I maybe wouldn't be aware of in terms of, music, art, that kind of thing. So yeah, I mean, it's
cool.
It's the students too. It's like seeing, I call them students, but they were members, I guess, of the corps or the high school bands or whatever that I've worked with. But seeing those people doing such, doing design and instruction on very high levels, having the opportunity to be a consultant or a mentor in some way to them, that's a really cool dynamic too that have recently come to enjoy more. I guess just not that I didn't enjoy before, just had the opportunity, I guess, as much.
Well, I'm sure the different, I mean, the different seasons that we're all in, it's like, are you aware of that role of a mentorship? Once people are getting the notes and they're having a challenge with the notes, and who's there to pick them up, who's there to encourage them, just like you're talking about Tom Hannum. I mean, It's the same thing. These kids are all kids, these are young adults, young men and women trying to figure out how to better themselves, and they're in a great organization, and they're lucky to have people like you there, and I applaud that relationship building, and I feel like that's one of the greatest things about Drum and Bugle Corps, and honestly the arts in general, is that you have the ability to really be around some people that kind of force you to level up at a young age. And if you start building a rhythm in that, I mean, you can be unstoppable, and I think that's what's exciting about that for kids.
I think there's so much passion wrapped up into the arts in general. My most vivid experience is being in the marching arts, at the moment, but I think it creates people who have moved through that activity, been successful, done things, and they feel a sense of responsibility to give back and ensure that the activity goes beyond what they achieved, or just continue to elevate the art form. And I think that sense of passion is something you don't find in many other walks or professions, I think, or, it's not as easily found, at least in my experience. So I have had wonderful mentors, and just, it's cool to, or at least just think about ways to be helpful to the next generation, I think, or the up and comers. Another way, I mean, as far as like staying charged and inspired, much of my year is spent like, designing, marching bands, drum corps, that kind of thing. In the winter, I always now, but judge for WGI, which is certainly, it's not a creative endeavor, but it's a something where you have the opportunity to, again, it's kind of this, in some ways it's a mentoring relationship. Some ways it's more of a counselor and critic relationship, but it's a way to just, I think the philosophy of WGI is to be, when you're running a recording, or if you're in critique, you're on that group's staff for 10 minutes. That's the mindset. And helpful and conversational and be a resource for that group and to give feedback. So, and just the amount of, I think, energy and accomplishment and creativity and percussion that comes through that activity. Fortunate to see hundreds of performances every year on a usual year. But just that's inspiring in and of itself. So that's something that's a really nice, well, not about being nice for me, but it's a respite kind of in a creative like vein for me, like to just sit back and enjoy and to be inspired and to see what other people are doing. And something I always really appreciate. So.
I love that, because I mean, I always think of it this way too, right? You're being a mentor for that program, and as an adjudicator or someone who's doing an evaluation, you know, some people may get, you know, they may have thought a musical idea should have way, and the comment was, oh, you should maybe think about it going that way. And what I always find interesting is that, you know, when people are performing and they're going to be judged or they're going to be critiqued, the worst answer, in my opinion, is, "Oh, good job." You know, you shouldn't be looking for that. You should always be looking for, like, how can I level up my next performance? How can I make our kids better? And I think that's something for me. I had to learn that later on as, you know, someone, you know, going through auditions and going through different, you know, levels of school and lessons and everything like that. You know, you want it to feel good, but feeling good about what you just did is that whole hitting that plateau. And it's like, no, it's not supposed to work that way. You should have someone constantly pushing you for that next level.
Always the what's next, right? It's like, yeah.
Exactly. All right. So honestly, we have some interesting things going on right now too. Some folks may feel like they're getting stuck kind of in a strange season. Obviously, COVID's a little strange. Do you have any like words of wisdom or, you know, quotes or any books that you kind of like reflect on when you feel like you're getting stuck?
I think it's another Tom Hanum quote, I think. But I remember one time, well, at least specific, not specific to COVID or anything like that, but it's like when I'm stuck or I'm having a problem with, or just on the fence about something that I've either written or listening to or that kind of thing. I remember one time, he probably doesn't remember either, but he probably said it to 100 people. But I remember he said, if it doesn't sound like music, keep changing it until it does. Which just made me laugh, and it's like, huh, that's like extremely profound too. Like, you know, it's like not being satisfied with, you know, just the answer's out there. You just have to keep searching for it. I think is that. As far as keeping going during these times, I mean, I don't know. It's all uncharted waters for everybody, I think too. But like, you know, it's an opportunity, I think, to learn something new. I think for me, it's been trying to kind of codify and formulate just some ideas about arranging, putting things down in words and video, that kind of thing, working on a few projects like that. Things that I wouldn't normally have the time to do, or, you know, or make the time to do, I guess. But you know, taking advantage of it to learn a new skill or to put more time into something that, you know, you haven't, in terms of your own playing, your, you know, whatever your chosen kind of focus in the arts is, you know.
That's great. All right, so I like this one a lot usually. So if you were to take your current you and you were to give advice to your 20-year-old self, what would you tell yourself?
I would probably tell him, I'm not sure how this would affect on the rest of my career, but just to make sure to stay more well-rounded, I think, in terms of not music necessarily, but just life. I think just making sure it's music is, and drum corps especially, marching stuff can be so consuming, right? I know, because it was what I thought about. It's what I wanted to do. It's what it was, you know, something, and there's value to pursuing something with a singular focus too. But I think, you know, a lot of things got lost, you know, along the way, you know, I think in terms of just other things that are important in life, in terms of trying to find a balance between your work, even if that's your passion, and, you know, personal life activities, things that broaden you as a person and make you, I think, hopefully better at those things that you're passionate about with music or whatever it is. I think so. I would just making sure you don't lose the things that make you a more well-rounded person. I think earlier on, is what I
That's
would tell
great.
them.
That's great. All right. So final question, anything personal, professional you've got going on these days? Anything new that we should keep our eye out for?
Not a ton, just because things are pretty much on hold.
Yeah.
Right now, we're in the middle of this composing for percussion seminar that Omar Camarnatas is doing. I'm not sure when this will be released, but it hopefully will continue beyond this year. We're doing it virtually this year, and I'm not sure what format it'll take, but some of the biggest and best minds in marching, concert percussion, and that kind of thing. It's been really, really cool so far. So looking forward to seeing how the rest of that goes. And that's kind of been some of my focus right now, and then figuring out what marching band's going to do in the fall, if anything, and trying to get that stuff ready. So, but that's about it, I guess, at the moment,
Great. So I just want to say, Tom, thank you very much for taking the time to chat today. I'm going to say also thank you for your service to our nation. And honestly, you're a huge example for so many other folks out there. And for me, it's been an honor to chat with you. And I just want to say thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark. It's certainly my pleasure. Thanks for all you're doing as well. I've been a huge fan of yours, your playing, your music, your military career, and otherwise. And it's an honor to talk to you.
Thank you, Tom. I appreciate it. So, folks, if you're interested in finding out more about Tom Rarick or the Bluecoats, you can find him online at Facebook or Instagram or YouTube, or at www.bluecoats.com. Thanks again, Tom. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Mark. Take care, everybody.
Take care. Greetings again, everyone. We just wanted to take a second to say thank you to Seif Studios for their creative media. If you want to find out more about Seif Studios, look them up on www.seifstudios.com. We'd also like to say thank you to our educational partner, ProLogix Percussion, American-made drum pads. They're doing a special discount code for our listeners today. So if you go to www.prologixpercussion.com and type in TWT20, you will receive 20% off your entire order. So thank you very much for tuning in today, and please check out our supporters.